The Pittsburgh Steelers could be missing Cam Heyward at OTAs. We'll talk about that. And we got Jenna Harner on to talk more about the Steelers schedule, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WXI. Also, you can kind of see a balloon floating around by her. It is Jenna Harner's birthday as we record on this Thursday, so happy birthday to you, ma'am. It's glad to have you back.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here as always. And what better way to celebrate than here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, talking some Steelers schedule, some Cam Hayward, all the fun things.
Absolutely. Let's dive in on the Cam Hayward subject. Now, I talked about Cam Hayward earlier in the week because there was some questions as far as, what would happen there. And it was reported that, hey, he said at a recent community event that he was looking for an extension for the Steelers. He wanted to play 2-3 more years, and he was hoping to get that kind of an extension. And now, a report came out from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler saying that Cam Hayward was going to skip Steelers OTAs while he waited to get this extension. And then Cam Hayward cleared this up a bit on his podcast, Not Just Football. Go check out that podcast. It's awesome. But he says, quote, "First of all, it's voluntary. Let's get that straight. I'm working out, doing everything. I've always attended these," meaning OTAs, "but at this time, it's just contract negotiations. I want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, but we'll see what happens. You got to do what's right for you. I'm training hard. There's nothing I'm not doing on and off the field. I'm doing everything possible, and we'll get there when we get there." To me, Jenna, this sounds very much like he's just like, hey, they don't need Cam Hayward to prove anything at OTAs other than just being healthy, and they can get that in training camp or whenever, mini camp, when that is mandatory. To me, this is just very similar along the lines of what we've seen from guys like TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deontay Johnson, Alex Highsmith, all guys who sat out things, were totally fine, came to work, and were, and performed just fine after they got their contracts done.
Absolutely. I don't think this is any negative, terrible. I've seen kind of a lot of different reactions on this. People are like, oh my gosh, what does this say about his leadership? I don't think anybody's questioning his leadership or the fact that he's not going to be able to do what he does on the field because he's not going to be coming to voluntary workouts for 3 weeks. There's no denying he is working out. There's no denying he's getting himself ready for this season. But this is kind of a move for Cam Hayward to say, hey, look, I want a little bit of leverage here. I want you guys, the Steelers organization, to hear me out, to hear me and my agent and what we're saying in terms of what we're asking for in my contract extension. And I'm not going to be participating. To me, this is one of those things that I think sometimes can be a bigger deal, not knowing all the nuance of it. But in reality, this to me is like, okay, if Cam Hayward's not there for day one of mandatory team minicamp, then there's going to be some questions, but I don't think it's going to get to that point at all.
I don't think it is either. And even if it's to the point where he shows up to minicamp and he just does his stuff on the side, like all four of those current, Deontay Johnson's no longer a Steeler, but all four of those guys who signed extensions with the Steelers did like working out on the side. I don't think there's a problem with that. Again, like you don't have to ask what Cam Hayward's role is going to be on this defense. There's no new defensive coordinator. Even if there was, this man knows what his job is. Hit the man in front of him, pressure the quarterback, stuff the run. Now, are there questions about his injury? Sure. But I think that that's something that can be easily ascertained by simply, do the doctors get a look at him? If the Steelers doctors have seen him and they feel like it's fine, do that. Now, the question is, though, how do the Steelers want to extend him? If they want to get this done here, there are some who think that Cam shouldn't get this big extension. I think that Cam should be given an extension. I'm not saying, give him Chris Jones money, but I do think that with the way that he's played, yes, last year he was hurt all last year, but the 2 years before that, he had double-digit sacks both seasons. For me, I think Cam Hayward should be getting an extension somewhere around $15 to $16 million a year. and give yourself some wiggle room at the tail end of that to make things happen. But you can also do it so whatever extension you give him that tacks on 2 or 3 more years, you can do it so that this year upcoming has a lessened salary cap hit, and that can open up the space to get something done. And I talked about this with Mark Bergen, I think on our Wednesday episode it was, or Tuesday episode, but I think that makes a ton of sense to wait to do this when then we will know what the Steelers need and who they want to get. So let's say they get this new contract extension done and they can open up $5 million or $7 million. That number might be determined by if they want to go out and get a Cortland Sutton or a cornerback or just sign someone in free agency. And then they know what they need to negotiate to, kind of move around Cam Hayward's cap impact this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. And we talk about all the time how general manager Omar Khan is such a wizard with the cap, that salary cap wizard that, does it exist? Does it not in terms of the cap itself? But the way he is able to finagle things and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, he renegotiated this contract, because it does seem like the Steelers are open to making some potential move. That was what Omar had said after we spoke with him after, was it the end of the draft or night one of the draft, at some point after, once they had finished drafting, when we had talked with him about that. It does seem like they're looking to make a move here. So this does make a lot of sense. The Steelers will go through these negotiations with Cam Hayward. Both sides will play a little bit of hardball, and then they'll say, hey, this is what we agreed to. This doesn't seem to me, though, like Cam is going anywhere. I think there are some people that I've seen that have had that reaction, and I don't look at it that way in any way.
Absolutely. Cam Hayward's a Steeler. Like he's a Mr. Steeler. I don't think this organization's ready to let him go. It would be one thing if there was like not just a Keanu Benton, but like a future Cam Hayward next to Keanu Benton behind him. And then the Steelers might be like, like kind of like how like they were telling James Harrison, hey, James, TJ Watt's behind you. You got to take a seat for that guy. And then TJ Watt's like the best defensive player in football for several years. Like that, but they don't have that right now. I think Keanu Benton's going to be very good. I think that he's a huge part of the puzzle, a huge piece of the puzzle for the future. But there's no like tandem right now that's set up behind Cam Hayward to just rise and replace him. I think that's actually going to be a priority for next year's NFL draft. And because of that, again, I think the Steelers, they look at it like, look, this will be an opportunity. Mike Tomlin always says, one guy's absence is another guy's chance to prove that they've got something. This is Keanu Benton's chance to show up in OTAs, show that he's in shape, show that he's improved, get some basics done. And then let's say this carries over into training camp. Let's say that he comes to training camp, he's working out on the side, he's not hitting or anything like that. And Keanu Benton wants to come, is getting more of the first team reps, and then he becomes better. And then let's say, DeMarvin Leal gets better this year, and this is a chance for him to step up. It's chances for guys like that to make a better impression, improve their game, and so that when Cam Hayward does come back, because again, I think he will. I think that there's going to be an extension done, and both parties are going to be happy about it. That then you have these two younger guys that are better off for it, and Cam Hayward back fresh and ready to go.
And I almost would expect, too, us to see little glimpses of Cam here and there at the facility. Right. I mean, this man loves this team. This man embodies what it means to be a Steeler and is kind of always around. So just because he's not going to be participating doesn't mean, like you mentioned, too, I could see him on the sideline coaching some guys up. And maybe that won't be the case early on, but by a couple weeks in here, especially for obviously mandatory team minicamp, I would see him being there, no question. But this to me, it's also it's a funny little thing, but like putting it in our lives and our terms where, okay, if you're working on an extension with your company, with your employer, you're trying to figure out what's the next steps. And, you're like, hey, I'm not going to work until you hear what there are some parallels in that way where it makes a lot of sense. But I don't think there's any question of what work Cam Hayward's putting in. He's going to be ready for this season. And ideally, he's going to be ready for the season with a fresh new contract extension that I think a lot of will make sense for both sides, him and the Steelers wise.
Absolutely. I think that's certainly going to be the case. We'll keep an eye on that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. I want to talk to Jenna more about the schedule, but not just the schedule itself, because we talked about that, but how the Steelers could attack the schedule on both sides of the ball and how that could impact things. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, and baseball's in full swing, and that makes FanDuel your #1 place to bet on every game in every single league. Right now, new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 or more bet. That's $150 to use on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. You can even bet on Caitlin Clark and the million different stats that she might get in her next WNBA game. You can do that all on FanDuel Sportsbook, the app that you can download right to your phone, or go to their website, FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can take advantage of this offer today. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner. Jenna, let's talk about the Steelers defense, because a lot has been made about the Steelers schedule with the quarterbacks that they're facing. In fact, you and I did this very much so on the live stream we did with Shelby Cassesi for Channel 11 on Wednesday evening when the schedule was revealed. But yes, the Steelers are going to face some young quarterbacks, but they're also going to face Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, and, of course, Patrick Mahomes. A lot of MVP candidates in there, and even if some of them, like Kirk Cousins, aren't MVP candidates, they're legit threats when they are on the field. What part of the Steelers' defense gives you confidence, if it gives you confidence, that they can withstand the gauntlet of quarterbacks they are going to face, especially on the second half of the schedule?
My eye immediately goes to the inside linebacker core and just how much the Steelers remade that position this offseason. I mean, obviously, the addition of Patrick Queen to me is so key and so crucial, but drafting a guy like Peyton Wilson, ideally getting a healthy Landon Roberts back on the field, getting Cole Holcomb back from his injury, depending on how long that will take. I know he might not be ready early on in the season for the Steelers, but this core is going to be so crucial to what the Steelers defense really is going to be able to do this season, because it's been such a weak point for them throughout the last handful of seasons. It has not been an entire strength when you look across the board on this Steelers defense in general. But to me, this feels like they're going to be able to get home after the quarterbacks. Obviously, you're going to have TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith bearing down. And ideally, depending on who you have in the back there, I know I love the idea of what Deshaun Elliott brings and how much that might free up Minkah Fitzpatrick to get back to what we've seen him do, just in the way that he can kind of play that center field type safety position. But to me, it all is going to start with this inside linebacker core and how much they're really going to be able to make an impact. And I think they will be able to. Again, you add a guy like Patrick Queen, who's arguably one of the best linebackers in this room. This defense gets better when you thought, based on the way things are right now, it's very hard to make teams immediately better in areas that they're already really skilled in. And I think that that's what the Steelers did this offseason and prioritized a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, again, when you go back and you look at how the Steelers played defensively last season, they gave up a lot of yards, but they also were able to keep teams out of the end zone. That's why they ended up being the number 6 ranked scoring defense in the NFL. But part of the yards, when you go back and you look at it, the Steelers, yes, they gave up, their corners, sometimes got occasionally toasted. Patrick Peterson, wasn't, his prime self and things like that. But when you look at what the Steelers really did defensively, I think that their addition at the linebacker, like you said, at that position is so big, because now that's not a weakness that you can just exploit as much moving forward with that spot. Like, for example, you look at the top guys that gave up yards. Like, sure, the top cornerbacks are going to give up yards because that's just where the numbers go. Levi Wallace, Patrick Peterson, those two guys, by the way, also not on the team. They gave up the most yards last year. But after that, you got guys like DeMonte KZ, Landon Roberts, Keanu Neal, 3 guys that lined up in the middle part of the field. That's where the Steelers got better this year. Dante KZ, I don't think he's going to be lining up as much in the middle part of the field. I think he's going to be more of a backup, deeper safety option in the Steelers' different defensive formations, especially because that's where Deshaun Elliott can play. You look at Patrick Queen, that's what he would be where Landon Roberts was in a lot of those passing situations. Even Michael Walker gave up 220 points. That was 220 yards, through the air. That was 8th most on the team. So you're looking at guys there. At least 3 of the linebackers encompassed up that, and those guys all playing off-ball linebacker. They're encompassing the most yards allowed in the passing game there. That to me is part of a huge part of this. Roberts is probably still going to be a part of that picture, but less so because Patrick Queen being out there can help with that. He can perform a lot better in the pass defense. And then if Peyton Wilson goes out there, maybe he helps with that as well. Because he's another guy that's been pretty good at defending the pass. But you look at that opportunity with the linebackers, and again, not just them by themselves dominating, but them being a better piece to connect the secondary where Joey Porter Jr., Minkah Fitzpatrick, Dante Jackson, that group's going to be with the defensive front where Cam Heyward, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. I think that's the key there, is that this is going to be a more connected defense than we've seen in years for the Steelers.
And it's crazy to say that, right? Because of how much the Steelers have relied on their defense because of the struggles offensively over the last handful of seasons. I mean, the 4 seasons I've covered this team now at this point have been, the defense has been carrying this team at the end of Ben Roethlisberger's career, and obviously with the ups and downs with Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett at quarterback. So it's a wild thing to say that the Steelers defense already an elite group when you just look across the board. Again, guys, you mentioned TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Alex Highsmith, Minkah Fitzpatrick got better. That to me should be very scary for a lot of the opponents in the AFC North and a lot of the quarterbacks the Steelers are going to face, because again, you're going to be going the second half of the season. You're going against Lamar Jackson twice. You see Jalen Hurts. You see Joe Burrow twice. You see Patrick Mahomes, for crying out loud. Like these are all elite caliber quarterbacks that can have a couple quick strikes and all of a sudden you look and you're down 2 touchdowns or down, 17 points at this point. That this way the Steelers shored up this position of need, I think, is going to lessen that a lot. And now obviously a lot of what this team is going to look like is going to be based on how long this offense can sustain drives. But if the Steelers offense can stay on the field for more than 3 and out, and give their defense what we saw a little bit towards the end of the season, just that reprieve and the ability to sustain drives, so your defense isn't on the field for the majority of the game, all of a sudden these really elite caliber quarterbacks might not look so elite against the Steelers.
No, I'm right with you there. I think that there's I think there's a lot to glean from what the Steelers have added to their defense. I think there's a lot to see how they can approach and how differently they can approach teams too, by asking different guys to cover. Again, just having the guys that they've had, that can get Minkah Fitzpatrick back to being where we talked about he needed to be all last year. I still think the Steelers need to add a slot corner, or at least figure out who that's going to be. Maybe they already have him on the roster and we just don't know who it is. But I think if they get that solidified, they stay healthy, and the linebackers play at a higher level than they did last year, and they stay healthy, because that's another part of it. They were playing well until they got decimated by injuries last year.
Within weeks of each other.
Exactly. That's the other thing. It wasn't like it happened gradually, throughout the season. It was like bang, bang. They lost 2 starters right away. And then Landon Roberts was also hurt, and they were down to backups and practice squad guys. So, if the defense can avoid the catastrophic injuries that it suffered, then I think that puts it in a much better situation to handle these teams. That's not to say it's going to be easy, because these quarterbacks are highly talented. They also have major weapons. The Steelers still have never beaten Patrick Mahomes since he's been drafted by the Chiefs. The Steelers have never won in Philadelphia since the 60s. So it's there's some serious challenges there, but at the same time, they were 5-1 in division last year. Granted, Joe Burrow wasn't part of that, but the last time they played Joe Burrow in the season, they split with him, with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett as the starters. I think that part of the answer here is not just the defense, but also the offense. I want to get to the offense here with Jenna right after this next break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because of eBay's Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Okay, Jenna, let's flip to the offense here, because one of the things that we are going to talk about with, the how tough it is in the back end of the season for the Steelers. Early on, they're going to play a lot of new quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins is also along with a new head coach with the Falcons, new quarterback, new coach there. Bo Nix, new quarterback for the Denver Broncos, new coach for the Chargers in Jim Harbaugh. Anthony Richardson only had 4 starts last year before he was out for the season with the Colts, so he's pretty new. Cowboys are the same, but the Raiders, they're probably going to have Gardner Minshew as their starter, and they have Antonio Pierce as their coach. That's going to be brand new. Aaron Rodgers only played 1 game for the Jets last year, so he's technically brand new. And then the Giants should have Daniel Jones. The Commanders will have Jaden Daniels. So you're talking about, I'd say 8 of those first 9 games, or 7 of those first 9 games, having new quarterbacks or new coaches or both to have to face. But here's the thing about this. The Steelers also got a new quarterbacks, and they got a new offensive coordinator. So they got a lot of things, and they're going to have rookies probably starting on the offensive line. My question is, how quickly do you think this offense can get to the point where it balances things for the Steelers this year, Jenna? Because I think that's going to be so essential to them coming out the gate and playing well against those early teams.
Yeah, you have to hope it's as soon as possible. And within those first 4 games of the season, we see what this identity of this offense is, because we know what an Arthur Smith offense in theory looks like. We've heard about what it looks like. We've heard about how he wants to implement things. And we've also seen, based on how the Steelers drafted, what their vision for this team and this offense is going to be. But that's the exact question. How quickly can they get up to speed, especially when you're probably going to have Zach Frazier, a rookie starting at center, who is incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly intelligent and one of the hardest workers, it sounds like. And that's all great. But how quickly is he going to be able to get up to speed as kind of being that guy that's, calling the checkdowns, checking plays at the lines, things in that realm of, what he's going to be asked to do. And then obviously Broderick Jones coming into his second year, but Troy Fautanu, how early and how quickly does he get into this lineup? And then as of right now, things can change depending on trades, depending on moves, but Roman Wilson is going to be looked at potentially as that wide receiver number 2. You're putting a lot on these rookies' plates. And also it's, hey, everybody who's been here for a while, we're changing things up. We're learning a new offense. There's going to be new schemes. And you ideally want to think that it's going to be something that this team can quickly get up to speed with. But we've seen that's not always the case. And we've seen over the last handful of years, especially last year, it took the Steelers offense a while to figure out who they were and who they wanted to be.
Yeah. I think that's the whole thing, is that finding their identity. You mentioned this both on the show and today. The Steelers, Najee Harris was talking about, we need to establish our identity by week 11 last year. They were hoping to do that by week 4 last year, and they never did. But that's where I think Russell Wilson really comes into play for the Steelers. And if he doesn't have to throw 40 touchdowns this year, he just has to keep the offense on pace and help them be what they're supposed to be. And that's running the football, keep possessing the football, not wasting possessions, not going three and out as much as they did. And if they're doing that, that makes the world of difference. I think that changes everything right there. And then they have an identity. They know who they are. And when you have that identity, you can play off so much. There were so many times we talked about play calling, and even when Matt Canada was the coordinator before he was fired, there was no bread and butter for the Steelers offense. There wasn't a play or two, right? And Jenna, you're shaking your head because you agree, there's nothing there. You go back to it. there wasn't a run play where when they call it, like when you go back to Le'Veon Bell and David DeCastro, Marquise Pouncey, there was a certain double pull play where they get 2 linemen out in front of Bell out in space, and you just knew that was getting you 5 or 6 yards. There was no 5 or 6 yard play for the Steelers over the past several years. And that's where Russell Wilson needs to get this offense to be like, hey, there's an identity. There's a thing that this is real, that we're really good at. And we're going to do that. It may not make us a top 10 offense, may not make us a top 15 offense. If it could just get them in the middle of the pack of the NFL, I think that's what this team has been missing. And you do that while the defense takes a step forward, even if it's a slight step forward, I think it makes the world of a difference. And it helps when you play these early teams that they're going to be searching for their identities.
And consistency, right? I mean, that's really all we're looking for on this offense. And I'm sure all the offense is looking for itself too, is can they be consistent? Can they, having, again, Russell Wilson and having what seems like Arthur Smith's offense is going to be, it doesn't ask the quarterback to do too much. It doesn't put everything on his shoulders and say, hey, we need you to go out there and win this game for us consistently. Obviously, that is part of how you win football games in the National Football League, but they're not putting too much on his plate. They're not asking Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, depending on the timing of things, to have to play quote unquote hero ball. They're just saying, hey, look, we need you to be competent, confident, and sustain drives for this team. Take options and take the opportunities when you have them. Find those deep shots to George Pickens when they present themselves. But you don't need to go out there and put the team on your back and be the only force here. And I think that that's going to be a big factor in what we see. That's going to be different from years ago. And also with what you mentioned, how many times it was like 3rd and 3 and the Steelers would get 1 yard or would go backwards and would something just wouldn't work out. You need those bread and butter type plays. And I think that's going to be part of what Arthur Smith does so well. I know there was so much talk, obviously, about, yes, it didn't work out in Atlanta. Things didn't look great, but he might just be one of those coaches in the league that is better suited as a coordinator and is better suited to be able to do what he does so well and do what he does so consistently that gave him that opportunity to have a head coaching job in the first place.
Absolutely. I think that mixed with a veteran quarterback like Russell Wilson knowing where to go, because some of those plays on 3rd down, when it was 3rd and 3, also were just passes that went nowhere. Like they were targeted to guys that weren't in the right spots, or overthrows or deep passes. Like, this is going to be a guy who Russell Wilson has won and lost the Super Bowl. He's been to 9 Pro Bowls. He's been on multiple teams. He knows how to handle NFL situations. He knows how to adjust when teams are trying to take away certain things away from him. And that's not something the Steelers have had since Ben Roethlisberger. And it's not something the Steelers have had in a semi-mobile quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger in like 2017, 16. Like that's it's been a while since the Steelers have had that in with competent quarterback play. And I think that is where I do think this offense can get a leg up on some of these early opponents if Russell Wilson, especially against a team like the Falcons that I think will struggle defensively this year. You come out the gate, you play well on the road in Atlanta, you show some things on offense, and then you start building off that confidence, play another team in Denver, which I think they have a good secondary, but I think that if they can run the ball on them, that'll be a huge sign. And then you take the confidence built from those 2 games to play the Chargers at home, who I think will be a very tough test for the Steelers' first home game of the season. But I think all this lines up for the chance to the Steelers to really come out the gate a lot stronger than they have for the past several years. The Steelers, again, in the month of September under Mike Tomlin, they're 30, 26, and 1. That's the worst month of all the major months that they play football in, because that's a 53 win percentage. In October, it's over 67%. In November, it's over 64%. In December, it's over 61%. The Steelers have not come out the gate strong in a lot of years. And I think that if they can do that this year, that's, as I talked about yesterday, that's a big step to making sure that the back end of the season doesn't put as much pressure on the team to have to win out against all those amazing opponents they're going to face.
And ideally, if you can start the season 2-2, you are in a fantastic spot. If you end that first quarter of the season, quote unquote, at 500, you say you beat the Falcons, you lose a close one in Denver, you lose a close one against the Chargers at home, and then you go to Indianapolis and beat the Colts. All of a sudden, it's, hey, this team has figured things out through the ups and the downs early on here. They're starting to really put together what they expect to look like on offense. The defense is playing really well, really cohesively, and you're staying healthy. All of a sudden, you go into that second quarter leading, still and not, those games aren't to me the ones that jump out and say, wow, these are tough tests, but you're still in that, quote unquote easier part, although the team and the organization will tell you no game is easy, but the teams on paper that look easier to play against, all of a sudden, and then you go into your bye, you feel like you're in a good spot. So that's basically what this Steelers team is going to need to do, is just stay consistent. And I think that that's going to carry them well this season with what they want to accomplish, and, staying relevant and competitive in an incredibly tough division in the AFC North.
Absolutely. We will see more angles of this as the time moves on. The Steelers open up OTAs next Tuesday. We'll give you a preview of that on our Monday show here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But Jenna, thank you so much for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Well, thank you as always for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a joy. And it's great to be here with all of our listeners and viewers as well. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner 11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner, and locally and online on WPXI, the NBC affiliate here in Pittsburgh. We got a lot of great stuff coming your way. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. She's Jenna Harner. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back on Monday, getting you ready for OTAs as the Steelers report back to the facility then. We'll see you then here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.